All right, we are back with another edition of Sunday Night AstroLive. Thank you for your patience and indulging my time delay. You know, I thought I had programmed the show, and I came here and I sat down and I went to push start show, and there was no show there. I was like, whoa, what the fuck happened? So I had to kind of redo the whole thing, and it's not the end of the world in terms of having to redo it. It just takes a little more time. Anyway, I think I'll continue to sit here and talk for a while people show up with this slightly later time. You know, I was also recovering from the fucking 49ers loss. I'm sorry. I'll get over it. I can get past these things very quickly. But I sat there and I told Tom, they're going to lose this game. They're going to lose this game. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. Put a fork in them. They're done. You want your Super Bowl picks right now? I'm going to give them to you. Detroit Lions versus the Buffalo Bills. The Bills dismantled the Kansas City Chiefs. I think they can do it again in the playoffs. They've got a better team. I don't think there's maybe any team in the AFC that can beat the Bills except for maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe, and possibly Baltimore on a good day. But whenever Baltimore comes up against a really good defense, there's just something that doesn't always click with Lamar Jackson and their game plan. I've just seen it again and again. Really, really good defenses can stifle him. And it looks just like Detroit is just they're on a mission of retribution from last year, and they just absolutely destroyed Jacksonville. Put a fork in the Jacksonville Jaguars. In fact, you could have done that weeks ago. So I think your Super Bowl picks are going to be the Detroit Lions and the Buffalo Bills, which will be great because neither of those teams have ever won a Super Bowl. Now, you never know. Kansas City could, decide, get some calls and like they always do, right? But if I was a betting man right now, those would be the two teams. Anyway, I'll get over it, and you'll help me. You'll help me get over it. This show will help me get over it. Oh, look who else will help me get over it. There she is. There she is. You know where she was before? She was laying on the bed. She was laying on the bed, and she said, you know what? You're going to do a show. I'm going to jump in and do it with you. That's right. She got that little racing stripe right down the middle of her forehead. Anyway, Mahomes has more lives than Michael Myers. You ain't kidding there. Right? They ain't kidding there. Although, again, they lost, right? I mean, the last time I saw them, they lost. They were losing. I'm assuming, yeah, there it is. Incredible 26-yard rushing touchdown, 30-21. Yep. Yes, indeed. Yep. Lions, Bills, there's your Super Bowl. Maybe if Minnesota gets hot. But they got to go through Detroit. Everybody's got to go through Detroit at this point. Yeah. So there you go. All right. Glad you can make it and be a part of my Sunday night therapy session. We got DJ MZC Michael. What's going on? The lovely and talented one. Saving Austin one tooth at a time. PB, what's happening? Jeff Rosen videos. What's going on, JR? Jackie Delorio. Night Slate. Hello, back at you. Andrew Garland. We got an Andrew Garland sighting. I haven't seen Andrew Garland's name in here for a while. Hi, Andrea. Good to see you. Ms. Behaving 2's here. Amy Gill. Got the triple green heart effect. Brandon Harris says, I am fucking cold here in Sin City. Sometimes hell is a cold place. Hell is a cold place to be. Bonnie Whitlow checking in. There's another blast from the past. What's going on, Bonnie? Hope you're doing well. Good to see you. Bonnie came on the Friday Forecast one time, did a great show on Atlantis. It was really good. Really, really good. Near the Wise, San Jose in the house. East Side, right here. East Side, San Jose. Wasn't born and raised, but mostly raised in the east side of San Jose. Rode in a few lowriders back in the day. Let's see. Tundar is here. What's going on? Tundar with baby. WC Ray, prepare for a cold winter. We could use a little cold. It's been fucking hot here. It's just now starting to chill out a little bit. Down the Wombat Hole, checking in from down under. What's going on, brother? Good to see you. Let's see. Bread and circus anyway. Lions scored so many touchdowns they got bored and tried to make sure everybody got it. Was just they're a juggernaut, man. They have built a juggernaut team. Big Dave Sullivan's here. Road trip 1981. That's our friend Darlene checking in from San Antone. Wendy Q. Wendy Q's here. Hi, Wendy Q. Let's see. Thor at the door. Steve. Our man Steve is here. Speaking of Steve, we got another one. Back-to-back Steve's. Zarelith, Immortal. Anon, 54544 Anon. Almost Pluto and Aquarius. Hey, I did a show here on Friday getting into a lot of the Pluto and Aquarius energy. If you want to get a adult dose of that, go check out the Friday show. It starts off with Misaki, and then we delve into this idea of Pluto and Aquarius and some of the schematics around it. Barbara Boots is here. Let's see. Shaky Aqua Frequencies buzzing. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to Pluto and Aquarius. Baby had to show Peach her beanie baby cheetah. Oh, how cute. How cute. Did you hear that, Peachy? Baby showed you the baby cheetah. Yeah, you'd like a little cheetah. Maybe I'll get you a beanie baby cheetah for Christmas. Would you like a little beanie baby cheetah for Christmas? I'm going to get you one. Susie G in the house. What's happening? Glimma Spank is here. Cats love cats. It's the baby law. Yes. The Wild Urban Gardener, also known as Cindy Burton. Hi, Cindy. Greetings back at you. Deanna, here listening again while making dinner. Sausage with fusilli. That sounds really good. Man, I just forgot. I'm hungry, or I just remembered I'm hungry. Tom, yes, please. Hey, listen, if you have not subscribed to the show, please do. It helps a lot. And hitting like helps as well. And some of you may have subscribed, but there's a really good chance that you may have been unsubscribed, in which case you can do it all over again. It's kind of like reincarnation. Just keep coming back and subscribing to being here, being in this show. So go ahead, hit subscribe and reincarnate every Sunday night with us. Thank you, Tom. Cienzef made it. Hello. Cisco Kid was a friend of mine. Yeah. Yeah. War was very popular with the old lowrider set back in the day. War, Malo, El Chicano, Azteca, the golden age. The golden days of Chicano rock, man. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Lives Outdoors here. Erica Modi. Hey, back at you, Erica. Joe Potter in the house. What's going on, brother Joe? Because yes, you can become a member of the 11th house there on Locals. I will be offering discounts to all supporting members over on the local side of things. Also, if you are looking for a unique Christmas gift, you can go to my website, robertphoenix.com. I'll just show you right now, robertphoenix.com. And let's see if I can do this. I don't want to plug in. I do not want to take you behind the wall I just want to show you the services that are available, which I can do right here. This is where you can order readings. And I have the star of the day, which, I do here on the Astro Weather Tuesday through Thursday. If you haven't been to my website, this is where you can go and you can get readings here. The star of the day right here. So it's about a 20 to 25 minute personal star of the day for a loved one or a friend. They've been pretty popular. So if you want to get one of these, you should start to do it now, especially if you want them as a birthday. Birthday, second time I've done that. Especially if you want them as a Christmas gift, you have to get them. You have to get them in, so I can do them before it's Christmas, and I don't want to do a ton of them before Christmas at the last minute. It was some show on Friday. Yeah, man, we were cooking on Friday. We were definitely cooking on Friday. This is from Bonnie. Hey, Robert. Yeah, that last show was great fun and so interesting. I'm doing all right in a relative way. We still live in Asheville. Got blasted by Hurricane Helene. We at house are fine. Thank God for that. I'm happy for that, Bonnie. And people in North Carolina are still digging out. And of course, we're hearing all kinds of crazy and morbid stories about dogs dying, horses dying, whatever they've dredged up there that's been beneath the surface has not been really good for the people. And you just wonder, like, how long will it take for them to come in and condemn that area, right? Like, I'm sure that there's going to be parts of that area that'll be condemned, and then, they'll flip that shit in some kind of disaster capitalism. Taffy Polensky's with us. Hi, Taffy. Good to see you. Let's see. Am I leaving YouTube? Yes, I am. We'll be going over to, I almost went to Rumble tonight. Oh, and I'll tell you why I almost went there tonight, because tonight's content is probably a 90% chance for me to get taken down, believe it or not, because of where we're going to go with the content tonight. So, yes, January, we'll be moving over to Rumble, and it will be a complete and total transfer of the operation. Hey, Jamie, what's happening? Maya Rose is here. Kabuki Theater Bo is here, but a little preoccupied, and that's okay. That's okay. We can be the ambient soundtrack to your preoccupation. Sheila Sampson checking in with us. Scott A. Hi, Scott. Charlie, look at him. He's all happy. His Bills won today. Hey, folks. His Bills are right up there. We'll put in a little plug for me. Superb readings by Robert. I learned so much from mine. Literally mind-blowing. Well, thank you, Cindy. We do our best here. Lannis Rising in the house, checking in from the true heart of the Midwest. Let's see. Oops, the lead to the LinkedIn copy. John Michael Greer, Twilight of Pluto, and the Future of Earth, Part 1. Oh, it sounds so intense. Let's see. Sandrine, Vox Services, bonsoir, bonsoir, bonsoir. I'd love to send you a bag of Beanie Babies from 30 years ago. It's okay. It's really okay. All I need is just one little cheetah Beanie Baby for Peachy. That's all I need. Let's see. Terry's here, lives in Western North Carolina. The things I can tell you, horrifying. I'm sure. I talked to some people down there. I've got a friend who lives on the outskirts of Asheville, and we've had Teresa on our show, who's given us some updates also from her part of the world in Boone, North Carolina. A little bit of a different perspective from both these people, but both of them are worthwhile. And I'll probably have Teresa back on again and give us an update. And I'll see if Michelle wants to come on the show. Michelle's a heavy hitter. The new time zone is weirding me out. Yeah, Peter. Welcome to the show. Sun Trekker Thompson, have you thought of going to FTJ Media for your shows? No. And I'm not sure I can really grow an audience there. You got to have a bit of a reach, although tonight's show would be right up FTJ Media's alley. I'd have no problem keeping this show on FTJ Media's. Thanks, TDF. Yeah, we're gonna move. I just can't deal with the censorship. Let's Bonnie Willow checking in about Asheville. Yes, I'm afraid you're right about Asheville. It's horrendous. Hurricanes do not come up into the mountains. This one blasted up here full strength and got stuck over Asheville. So intense. Yeah, I think we can all agree upon geoengineering. We've seen it many times before, from strange fires that seem to evolve from interesting beams of light and heat from the sky to steering massive weather fronts over certain areas. When you think about it, it's a pretty powerful tool for global control. I mean, just think about it for a second. Now, I'm not sure you can do it every week, right? Like, I think you have to sort of wait for the conditions to be correct and then steer those conditions. But man, it's a massive blow. Claire is here. Hi, Claire. Good riddance, YT. Just wish Rumble was a little more navigable. Yeah. So for people who are not familiar, Rumble seems to have a lot of ads, like YouTube does now, and they have to pay for their service somehow. So I would suggest going ad free if you're going to go to Rumble. That's what I would say. Bonnie's checking back in here again. So many of us are sure the land with the quartz and lithium will be grabbed because it was decimated. Not just decimated, condemned. They'll condemn the land and they'll quarantine it for a while, and that will keep people from doing anything, no rebuilding, right? And then eventually what they'll do is they'll send in a team of remediators. So they'll wind up remediating the soil, right? And then they'll lift the condemned label, but it won't be until long after the fact, and most people will not be able to return, obviously, because either their insurance won't cover it, or the condition of the land, and so they're running a fine line here, right? Because they would have to cop to some level of either burying some sort of toxic material or toxic chemicals already, so that when the surface layer came off, right, we got washed away, then what was beneath the surface layer began to emerge, and theoretically that's been what's been making all these animals, people sick in that area. So they'll condemn it, but they have to figure out a way that they can language it so that it's not necessarily on them for what they'd already previously buried in that area, right? I mean, I think that's what they have to do, because if it's true, if what we're talking about is true, then they would be responsible for that. It's going to be very interesting to see how this goes down with the Trump administration and some of the people that are. And for me, the Trump administration is kind of a 50-50 kind of split right now between people that seem to have the interests of another country besides the United States much more closer to their heart than this one, and some relative outsiders who are like people like Tulsi Gabbard would be considered an outsider. And I think to a large extent, somebody like Kristi Noem would be an outsider as well. Clearly, RFK is an outsider. Now, his position on Israel is in alignment with Trump and a lot of other people inside the Trump administration. But he's an outsider in the sense that when does a lifelong Democrat show up in a theoretical Republican cabinet And I think RFK Jr., if he's able to pass through this thing, is a man with a mission, right? He's a man with a mission, and he's got Pluto, hovering around his Capricorn sun. It's very close, and very interesting. It's a very interesting development. And if he becomes the head of HHS, he'll have all those documents, and they'll all be unredacted, so he'll be able to see everything. Like, it's really a pretty major development. So it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing unfolds, right? And I talked a lot about it on Friday. I got into it on Wednesday, right around Wednesday, on 15 Minutes of Flame over on Rumble, and I went through all the different picks. The only pick that I would revise a little bit in terms of my original sort of breakdown would be Pete Hegseth. After spending a little more time with Hegseth as a individual / character, it's like, man, this guy is hardcore, and he is all about serving the needs of the third temple, right? And by the way, there's no real record of the second temple, and the first temple is considered to be a bit dubious. But the idea that there's a third temple is a bit debatable, especially among scholars, right? So we're going to get into some of that tonight when we talk about the title of the show, and the persons associated with the title of the show who is Dan Bilzerian. So why don't we just make a transition? Well, why don't we do this? Before we get into Dan Bilzerian, let's do a little shout out for True Hemp Science, and then let's look at where we are astrologically. I think that would be very, very helpful. And then after that, we'll make a transition into Bilzerian. And one of the things I want to bring into the discussion around Bilzerian is not just what he's talking about, but I've often felt that Sagittarius has a very interesting evolutionary path. And the evolutionary path of Sagittarius is it starts with some high degree of self-indulgence and overdoing something, right? Which Sagittarius can be really, really good at. Whether it's women, whether it's drugs, whether it's a combination of all three. Like, Sagittarius is larger than life when it comes to its appetites. And we'll go through this list of Sagittarians it's not really the list of Sagittarians in general, but there's a list of Sagittarians that I've found that match this model, which is not saying no, right? They don't say no. And then at a certain point, there's a major shift in their consciousness, and they will find God, or they'll find the truth, in which case they will do this 180, and they'll go from this self-indulgent kind of larger than life appetite for experience and gratification to becoming harbingers of truth. So it's a really fascinating sort of path that Sagittarius has. And I've got a couple Sagittarians lined up to show you what I'm talking about. And Dan Bilzerian fits the bill. And he fits the bill maybe more than all these other people combined, based upon his rather prodigious appetite for women and the hedonistic lifestyle that goes along with it, right? So we're going to get into that, and we're going to look at this fascinating kind of development with Sagittarius. And you know who has this, by the way, generationally? It's Gen Z. And Gen Z, if they start off as being self-indulgent and just diving into their prodigious appetites as a group, they will come through that, right? They'll come through that, and they will come out the other side And you'll find that Gen Z will be, there's a word that's associated with, this phase of the Sagittarius expression. It's called piety, and this sense of being pious. And it's fascinating to watch. So Gen Z will be this interesting kind of moral barometer, as they shift, especially some of the younger Gen Zers who have Uranus and Pisces, right? So they'll go through, a lot of them have had Saturn, going over their natal Uranuses, which has been interesting, and they've had to temper. So wherever Uranus is in their chart, right? It's kind of like figuring out how to cage a tiger or something like that, or be able to I'm going to use the word channel, but ground this kind of radical Uranian energy that they have, and every generation goes through it, right? Wherever your Uranus is, anytime you get a Saturn transit over that, but for them, it's their first Saturn transit over Uranus. So collectively, again, this is, because the Gen Z is broken down into basically two parts, right? The first part of Gen Z starts right around 1996. Pluto and Sag, Uranus and Aquarius, a little bit of Neptune and Capricorn. Eventually that phases out, right? And I think around 2002, Uranus goes, or late 2002, early 2003, Uranus goes from, so it starts at 1996, so 7 years later, 7-year run, that'll be 2003. So Uranus goes from Aquarius to Pisces, and it will stay there until Pluto goes into Capricorn, and then Uranus eventually moves into Aries, and that puts us into Gen A territory. So anyway, we'll see this. We've already saw it partially during COVID, right? With the first wave of Gen Z, when Saturn was going over their Neptune and Saturn was going over their Uranus, and beginning to harness that first group and harness their intention, harness their energy. Of course, great friend of the show, Dr. Longo, part of that group, and going through that change as well, right? And eventually, putting up his YouTube channel, which has been just outrageously successful, and allowed him to really, do his Sagittarian thing. And basically, he's like he's a teacher, right? Like Longo is a teacher, and you'll see this with Pluto and Sag. We have Jeff Rosen in the house, another part of that generation. And so, but the idea is that with Saturn, right, the big player, and ultimately they will be the moral barometer. Now you may say, well, a lot of them are really crazy, and a lot of them are kind of whacked out, and we're witnessing some of that. But I guarantee you that'll change. This is just the nature of Sagittarius. Now, how deep will the change go? Will they become, bleeding fascists? I mean, that remains to be seen, right? But it's a very interesting shift from Pluto and Scorpio to Pluto and Sag. They're very, very different in terms of how they kind of view the world and morality and codes and ethics, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so let's get into where we are astrologically. Let me fire this up. Let's see where the sky is right now. Let me edit this. By the way, again, thank you for being here tonight and being a part of the show. Okay. Had I started just a little bit earlier, would have had Jupiter on that ascendant, and it would have been an absolutely brilliant placement to talk about Sagittarius. Nonetheless, we'll still have a good discussion. All right. So here we go. We've got 4 degrees of the sun in Scorpio. So it is winding down here. We're coming off a full moon on Friday night. That was massive. How did people do on Friday night? Did people manage to get out of Friday night unscathed? Question mark. Like a crazy energy on Friday night. I should have spent more time looking at that on Friday, because emotionally all over the place, man. All over the place on Friday night. And it's like very explosive. Very, very explosive. And if you made it through on Friday night, you're good. You're good. You managed to navigate some volatile territory. Uranus hanging out on Algol and retrograding now. It's a really interesting aspect in terms of what's happened post-election. And we've been dealing with Uranus and Taurus for a while now. And, well, technically it should be good for my chart, like trining my sun. It's been kind of a pain in the ass, I think, for a lot of people. And Uranus in Taurus is in its detriment. This is when deconstruction happens. You go back to World War II, when they had Uranus and Taurus, and what were they doing? They were deconstructing Western Europe, deconstructing borders, deconstructing boundaries, deconstructing civilizations. So Uranus and Taurus I don't think it's a great place for Uranus. But then on the other side of the war, Uranus goes into Gemini, and then everything just speeds up rapidly. And we have all of this technological advancement. You go back to Uranus and Aries, and if you look at the inventions that took place during Uranus and Aries, everything that they have either invented or repurposed from some other time. And this is really, I did a whole show with this on Gaia one time. It's really considerable. For instance, transistors come up during this period of time, and they're using tubes, right? But transistors are developed during this period. FM radio, believe it or not, even though it's not put into action, it's developed during this time. Television is developed. This is all like pre-World War II, right? Just the lead up to World War II. All these crazy inventions, radar, sonar, they all take place with Uranus and Aries. Complex polymers and plastics, same thing, right? So what do they do? Well, they put them together and they basically road test them in a war. And then once they road test them in a war, they take the best of breed stuff and then they put it into the commercial sector. And that's Uranus and Gemini. And there's all this, crazy development, and, people are, mentally involved in whatever it is, whether it's assembly lines or things happen very, very rapidly after World War II. So there's this deconstruction phase that takes place. And, we've had these wars, right? 2022, Ukraine and Russia start going at it. And it's like, okay, well, COVID is over, and now we're going to have the equivalent of this doppelganger of World War II. And then there's Poland. Poland always seems to be involved, kind of on the border and on the fringe of all this. And there's more talk about Poland now launching missiles. And apparently the Biden administration has given Ukraine the green light to do anything they want. Right. So if you and your pals in Poland or NATO, whoever, right, if you want to launch these missiles deep into the heart of Russia, hey, Joe Biden's not going to be around. So this would be a fantastic time to accelerate the conflagration. Also, I think there's a huge amount of money that they're ready to throw back out to Ukraine. Of course, Taurus, especially during this Sun Uranus opposition and other people's money. And Ukraine has just been a money laundering operation. It's been huge money laundering operation. Yeah, they're using some of the shit to fight, whatever. But it's been a massive con. Totally massive con. So we have Uranus right here, retrograde, algol, and I think a lot of that also is connected to people. One of the things that I think algol has shown us, it doesn't matter like what side of the political aisle you're on. I would say that for the most part, both sides have been fighting for a voice. And you hear this now with people on the other side of the election, and nobody's listening to them, and the other part of America listened, like Trump, the other part of America listened to Trump, and then they voted for him, right? So it's the other part of America's fault, and there weren't enough people listening to the bad things that Trump is or has done. And this is all real algol related stuff, but both sides have been through this. There's been huge amounts of censorship on the quote unquote right side. And now the left is crying that, whatever message they had was not being heard or heard enough because it's being drowned out by a bunch of other people who, for whatever reason, were listening to Trump and buying into Trump, right? This is all algol stuff. And you're watching these people, come to terms with their inability to theoretically have a voice. It's very hard to have a voice in our society. And in a weird way, I kind of sympathize with them because also I've seen it on the other side of the equation where, it's like, fuck you, we're not listening to you. So it's not something that's just affecting one side or the other, right? So with this retrograde on algol, I think it's really interesting because it's also sextiling Neptune and trining Pluto. And it feels between these three titans, right? Two of them are retrograde and one just about ready to move into Aquarius. It'll still be trining, by the way. But between these three titans and two of them being retrograde, we do have the ability to reshape, in a lot of ways, the world that we live in. And these changes will come about as a result of the outer planets, not as a result of one man's ability to manipulate and or articulate what's happening. There are major changes coming. And we watched a Peter Boghossian video last night. I really like Peter Boghossian. It's funny. I think that he's Armenian, like Dan Bilzerian, like Boghossian, Bilzerian. They're kind of same tribe, same group of people. I really like Peter Boghossian, and he was talking about education and what Trump was talking about. Trump has this education thing nailed down pretty well. So there are three pillars, and we can look at all three pillars here of the outer planets that are playing this transformational role. There are three pillars to resetting the table, right? Resetting the foundation for this country, and maybe as a result of kind of a domino effect for the quote unquote rest of the free world. So what are those three pillars? One of the pillars has to deal with health, right? So we're gonna ascribe that right there to Uranus and Taurus. Taurus being the land, being the things that grow out of the land, being the animals that eat the things on the land, right? So we're gonna pin Taurus as Gaia and Earth, right? Here comes Uranus, and it's retrograding, and like look out, look out. This is a reformatting potentially of how things are not just grown, although there is that, but what goes into the things that come out of the earth and the artificial contents that have been harming us for decades now and making this country incredibly obese and sick, right? These are major themes that I think are going to be redressed. We're just going to look at the three outer planets, right? So we're going to describe this as to our relationship with the land and the food and the things that come out of it and our bodies. So if this whole RFK thing works out, and I think it will, he's going to get it. RFK will wind up becoming, and they will be scared shitless, but he's going to become the head of Health and Human Services. Okay, let's look at let's look at Neptune here, right? We're going to talk about Neptune, and Neptune for me represents, especially in Pisces, it represents propaganda. It represents this idea that people can become so deluded, right? So deluded by false messaging and false claims, which again we talked about last week, right? So Neptune is playing a role here. Neptune is also very much related to Taurus, Pisces and Taurus. If this is the earth, and these are the waters of the earth, and this is the oceans and our rivers. This is the drinking water that we have in our lives. And Neptune retrograde, I think we're going to revisit fluoride and, you know, the effects of fluoride. And I know that Kennedy will go there. So these retrogrades are really, really interesting. Also, Trump has talked about taking on the cartels in Mexico and having to deal with like the drug issue, which is very Neptunian, right? Let's get into Pluto and Aquarius. And it's again, what are we dealing with here? You know, Aquarius is the mass media. And Pluto in Aquarius will transform the mass media. It's already been in this process of transformation. When you get somebody like Joe Rogan or hell, even Patrick Bet-David, and I'm not a huge fan of Patrick Bet-David, but he pulls really big numbers. And Patrick Bet-David will have more views than tonight's episode of 60 Minutes. I guarantee you. So we've been going through this transformation with the media. That's going to occur. It's going to continue to occur, right? And so this is all very, very interesting. And let's throw in Jupiter here as well. You know, a Titan, but not as much as the outer planets. Jupiter's in Gemini, and Gemini rules education. And Jupiter rules higher education, right? Rules things like colleges, but Gemini itself is ruled by the third house, and that's your basically K through 12 educational experience. And again, you know, what are we seeing here with Jupiter retrograde Gemini is this kind of Trump came out and basically said, hey, we're going to re-envision education, right? So these outer planets are starting to really make their presence known in terms of like these different aspects of, you know, what's happened to us. And not, look, Europe's a little better off in some ways and worse off in others. Food wise, Europe's better off. There's no doubt, right? Europe is much better off food wise, but Europe has had to deal with as much propaganda as the United States has had to deal with, right? So we're kind of equal in that regard. And in terms of alternative media, Europe still does not have the same kind of clout in a lot of ways. Then there are some very good people like I like Keith Woods, although sometimes Keith is a little limited in his perception, right? Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Keith says RFK is a slave to Israel, and he should not be considered to have any kind of a place in Trump's cabinet. But in the HHS, it's all about context. And I talked about that also yesterday, or Friday rather. It's all about context. Like, so that relationship doesn't matter as much. What matters is Kennedy's lifelong commitment to health and the land. The guy's a Capricorn. He's a hunter, right? He spends a shit ton of time outdoors. So this is somebody who's right for the job. There are other European streamers who I think are quite good, right? But there's more of a lockdown in Europe now when it comes to just social media in general. People in France can't watch Rumble. I keep reading stories over and over again where people are being picked up in places like Germany and England for saying things that, for whatever reason, they feel that's harmful to other people, right? So Pluto and Aquarius ultimately will be about transforming the media. If you go back and you look at radio and television, they're ruled by Aquarius initially, right? Because how you receive TV was through the waves, right? The waves in the atmosphere. How you received radio was the waves in the atmosphere. And you had an antenna that would take those waves, right? If you think about it, it's really kind of fucking amazing that you have these waves that come through, and your old TV antenna that was propped up against your chimney in many cases, you had this line that came down and it plugged into the back of your TV, and you were able to get images that were floating through the air. I mean, it's really a mind-blowing concept. I mean, it's still happening. Like right now, there are things that are still being transmitted through the air, right? Like there are like it's less and less because things are coming through the wire now, but there are still things that are transmitted through the air. There's still an analog signal. I don't know what's going through it. My paranoid and cynical nature would say it's probably not great, but there's still an analog signal that they used to transmit the TV stations through, right? There's still radio signals all over the place, and there's still radio towers. So those waves are still, coming through us. And then there's all the other waves, like the 5G and all the other stuff that has replaced the analog signal. But that's where it all started, right? So TV and radio and they still are Aquarian mediums. So when Pluto goes into Aquarius, we'll probably witness, and they're already on their deathbed, we'll witness the sort of the final collapse of this idea of radio waves and analog TV waves, like going through the air, right? It'll transform into something completely different. But these outer planets are in play right now, right? And they're in play in terms of what's happened to us post-election. Even Jupiter retrograde Gemini, you go back and listen to Trump's 2.5-minute speech on the future of education, and it's really interesting. It's really, really interesting, like stripping away sort of these endowments and accreditation. And Peter Boghossian was really excited about this. And that gets us into that Saturn square, right? That Saturn square with Jupiter. It's like, okay, Saturn's going to bring some limits here. Saturn says, whoa, hold on a second. We've gone too far. And Saturn in Pisces is very parochial in a lot of ways, right? Like we just witnessed Oklahoma putting the Bible back into the school. The state of Oklahoma said, we're going to bring the Bible back into the school. So that means elementary school, high school, you're going to have the Bible in Oklahoma, right? And again, that's Saturn Pisces squaring off against Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. It's like going back to another period of time, getting education. I mean, ultimately getting education to when did the Rockefellers take over? Was it like 1916 or something like that? Right? When the Rockefellers took over education in this country, like this retrograde is about stripping away and getting back to not just basics, but a meritocracy. Like that's one of the things that Trump talked about. And if you haven't seen the Trump Peter Boghossian piece, and Peter, you can go. By the way, Peter's a great follow both on Twitter and YouTube. I follow him. He comes out of the kind of the Socratic tradition. He's a philosopher. He was canceled, I believe, by the University of Portland when he and James Lindsay and what's her name, Helen. I always fuck up her last name, but the three of them did these papers that exposed academia because they took these ridiculous kinds of concepts and they just used the language of critical theory, and they basically made a mockery out of academia, and it cost Peter Boghossian his job. But he's not given up, and he's remained quite active and does his street epistemology stuff, which is really, really interesting. Helen Pluckrose, I think that's her name, Helen Pluckrose. Yeah, and James and I. So he was a great person to create these academic forgeries, is really what they are, and expose the system. So one of the things that Boghossian talks about and what Trump talks about is a meritocracy, and not just giving things out, right? Because people supposedly showed up, right? Like you have to prove what you've learned. And the other thing that is really interesting about what Trump talked about was the fact that there were people who were discriminated against for the last, I don't know, however long, 4, 5, 6, 7 years in the academic setting. And the people that Trump is referring to, in which Peter Boghossian clarifies, is the Asian community. The Asian community was really discriminated against, especially at Ivy League schools, because they were winnowing them out, right? They didn't want the Asian community to set the standard for like the bell curve of entrance for these schools. And so what they did is they made them pay the price for like their scholastic achievement. Like the Asian community has always been, like when I was a kid, like the Asian kids were always the smartest motherfuckers in the class, always. Whether it came to math or science, in English, like they were really smart, really, really smart. And so Trump talks about this, and Boghossian picks up on it. It's like these people need to be compensated for the fact that they were discriminated against. So again, the outer planets are really setting the tone here in this kind of post-Trumpian election cycle. You know, you can just see it. Uranus, Taurus retrograde, the Earth and our relationship, how we grow things, what we put in our foods, right? Neptune retrograde, like the waters are connected to that, drugs are connected to that, propaganda is connected to that. Pluto moving forward into Aquarius, transforming our media. And you're going to see MSNBC get sold off, right? Like they're on the ropes right now, and CNN's not far behind. So this is going to be a really interesting series of developments. Yeah, so the retrogrades are kind of resetting the table. Now Saturn won't go retrograde again until next year. So Saturn's moving forward now, right? Saturn's out of that retrograde mode. We got Mars is going to go retrograde when it hits 6 degrees. So that's not that far off, right? And then we have this Mars retrograde cycle in Cancer, which is going to be fascinating. And I think we might have talked about that last Sunday night. First thing it's going to do, it's going to go over Trump's personal planets. That'll be very interesting. I think Trump is going to encounter some old enemies along the way, people that were um, sort of, speed bumps in the past, impediments in the past, they return. Right here they are. It's like, oh, okay. What it feels like? It feels like, God, it almost feels like a Kurosawa film or something like that, right? And like, there's these tests along the way that are going to happen. And I don't think the attacks on Trump are done or over. Again, whatever you think of Trump, whether he's playing both sides or he represents the deep state or Israel, right? Astrology is astrology. So you have Mars retrograde going over his Saturn, and I believe his Venus, not his Mercury. I won't go as far back as his Mercury, but that's conflict, right? And that the first planet's going to hit in Trump's chart is Saturn. So you're going to have like this very intense and aggressive sort of attack on his authority. So Trump's not, quote unquote, out of the woods yet, right? But also, let's look at this from like a bigger picture, right? Mars and Leo in general is very much connected to kings and queens and bloodlines, which we've talked about ad infinitum on the show, right? The retrograde into Cancer is interesting because it's going back into like the folk, right? Cancer is very, folk oriented and folk related. And I think people are going to have to realize and understand that Trump and his administration is not going to do everything, right? They can't, number one. And number two, I think there's also something very healthy about Mars retrograde and people re-engaging in some of the things that, they may have originally experienced during the whole COVID thing, which is number one, if I can't get food from my grocery store, then where am I going to get it from? Well, you're going to start a garden. And, Christine is in chat. I saw her earlier. And what did she do? She said, okay, well, I'm going to learn how to raise rabbits and I'm going to learn how to process rabbits. And that's a skill, right? And that was a whole COVID thing. That's a total Mars Cancer experience. Right? It's like we have to figure out how to do things for ourselves. A lot of people started raising chickens during that time. I thought about it. It's like, yeah, it's like, no, it's the middle of summer. I'm not going to start a chicken group. That's not going to happen. Right. But this is what Mars retrograde will remind us of. And so how does that happen? We're going to come back again and Mars is going to, come back into that opposition with Pluto. And I think we dodged maybe a little bit of a bullet there with that Mars-Pluto opposition, but it's going to come back again. And, are we on the verge of another pandemic? Right? It's like, okay, well, they had the first case of monkeypox show up in San Francisco last week, and we know what monkeypox is about. Monkeypox is ultimately about unclean sex. Right? I mean, that's really what it's about. It's in through the outdoor. And San Francisco, ground zero, hello, right? But again, what the media will do is the media will spin this. And they won't give you really the true reason behind monkeypox, but they'll just tell you what the CDC or the WHO's version of what that is. So will it be a monkeypox situation? Will it be a bird flu situation? What are we going to be dealing with here if we're moving back into scamdemic territory, right? And do you think people are going to want to be put back into their cages again? Hell to the no, right? So we're gonna track this. We're gonna track this Mars retrograde as it goes through Cancer. And again, I think it's healthy to remember that not just one person or one regime is going to change things overnight, right? We all have our own role to play in this world, and if we want to be to some degree self-sufficient, or if we want to be to some degree be able to take care of ourselves during a period of time where certain things aren't available to us, Mars retrograde will get your attention, especially in Cancer. Tonight, we got a nice grand trine, even though Mars is in Leo and we got the sun over here, we got Neptune there, which is coming out of Cancer. So it's part of grand trine land. As the sun moves forward, we're going to get the sun. It'll be, 4 days? It'll be at 0 Sag. And I think Mars is kind of at its peak, getting ready to station. That's going to be a very interesting time. Very interesting time, especially with the sun being still in trine with Neptune. And there's a hardcore religiosity with the sun in Sagittarius trining Neptune here. And not in a bad way, by the way. It's not in a bad way. But there's a sense of a moral conviction that is going to be born out of this period of time, and it's not that far away. And Mars is there to kind of back it up. Right now, it's going to go retrograde. So even if it's retrograde, it will still be in trine. But the sun moves pretty quickly, as we know, right? So it'll move out of that trine of its own accord. So what we're doing here is there's a template being set, right? This is a template, and I feel like it's a really healthy template in a lot of ways, because we're looking not just in this country, but in the world, right? I feel like we're looking to reacquire our moral center, because we've been knocked off this moral center fairly significantly as a whole, not as individuals, right? But as a whole, we've gone down, do as thou will, right? And everything goes to this like really weird period of how would I call it? Kind of social decay, right? And watching like people sort of morph into this weird kind of, Weimar Republic meets some kind of, genetic mutation, with like sort of post-atomic genetic mutation in the Weimar Republic, where it's very decadent. The Weimar Republic is very decadent, and it's decadent for a reason. Number one, social engineering, and number two, there's just the morale of the people of Germany was at an all-time low, right? So we've seen this, right? We've seen like sex work rise over the last 8 years. OnlyFans, huge. Theoretically, there have been women that made millions and millions of dollars off of OnlyFans. Porn has become a major factor in the lives of young men, and not a good one, by the way. And it's porn is almost as bad as fentanyl, because it gets into your brain and you get keyed up in a way that you're just not going to get keyed up in your regular life, right? Not everybody has a fucking porn sex life. Dan Bilzerian did, but not everybody's had that, right? So it sets a huge amount of unrealistic expectations, number one. And number two, it makes it almost impossible to have true intimacy with another person. So again, this is all part of like this reset of the moral center. And it's going to be very interesting. Just clock this 4 days out. 4 days out. Clock it. So where are we? Sunday night, Thursday. All right, let's circle Thursday, Friday, and see what comes out right around Thursday and Friday that addresses the thing that I'm talking about. Right? Who knows? It may be another one of these 2.5 minute Trump videos where he addresses some of this stuff, or it may be somebody else who peels off and, winds up, taking a major stand. Now, again, we're going to get into the Dan Bilzerian chart. He's a Sagittarius. And the other moral stand here, I think, is going to come down to Israel and what's happening in Israel and Gaza. It's going to be a very interesting part of how the Trump administration handles this, because, of course, he's hired a bunch of hardcore Zionists, right? Some of the people he's hired or wants to hire aren't as hardcore. So he's trying to mix and match, right? Some of these people who are paybacks clearly for Mary Matelson and the $100 million she supposedly gave to Trump. And also probably some of the things that he wants to do outside of that, right? So Israel is going to, this whole Israel thing is going to be, it's going to be a topic. And I think Thursday, Friday, it becomes a very big topic. And of course, you'll have people that are incredibly strident and, see Israel as this, the golden key, right, to revelation. And it promises this sort of, I don't know, religious ideal in some ways, right? You'll see plenty of people on the so-called right go down that path. And this may be part of it, right? We may see some of this during that time, but also know that the sun here is going to come in and 2 weeks into its stay in Sagittarius. What's it going to do? It's going to oppose Jupiter. It's going to square Saturn. And it feels to me like there's going to be some kind of accounting or reckoning around what's going on over there, right? There's going to be, and I know that Trump's plan is to basically bankrupt Iran. Like, that's his plan. He wants to bankrupt Iran. Well, I think he tried to do it last time, so we'll see, right? We'll see. So yeah, this is kind of where we are right now, just in terms of big picture stuff, right? The big picture stuff. Venus in Capricorn, sextiling out there against Saturn. Those are relationships that are dependable, right? These are relationships that are dependable. And I would say, if we're looking at this chart as a template and a guide, practice some loyalty here, right? Practice some commitment. Practice, living up to your word, and, hanging in there with people. Like, this Venus Saturn sextile is really, really good. And it rewards, loyalty is a really weird thing, right? So it's kind of like, somebody fucks up, right? They're fuck up. And because you are related by blood or by bond, right? Like, there's this underlying theme that you have to be loyal to them. And there is some truth to that. But there's also, you can't just be blindly loyal. I have some stories around that. I'm not going to get into it right now, but you just can't be blindly loyal. I think you have to be proactively loyal. And that's what this Venus Saturn sextile is about, right? So, wherever Capricorn is in your chart, you're going to have that Venus transit. Wherever Saturn is in your chart, it's going to come in and it's going to sextile Saturn. So, you get to practice some proactive loyalty. Hang in there with certain people, especially if they deserve it. That's the other part of this, right? If people, the sextile is interesting because you get to try it out. It's like, put it on for size and see what it looks like and feels like, right? So I think that's great. We have Mercury here, conjunct Pallas in Sag. That's a really interesting conjunction. Pallas in Sagittarius sees the truth, right? It sees the pattern. It's like, if it happens again and again and again, what's coming, right? What's coming, and it's not some illusion. It's not some falsehood. So there are a lot of people that are using Pallas right now. And I think that they're looking at Trump and they're looking at the people that he's hiring. and they're saying, see, it's coming. It's coming. This is how it's going to go down. Be careful of that. Because Pallas is squaring off against Neptune. And this is interesting because when you think you have the truth, you can quickly find out that it may not be as true as you thought it was. There's a lowercase t and a capital T, right? And so a lot of people are very subjective in terms of their thinking, and they use tools to objectify their subjectivity, right? Like astrology is one of them. It's a tool. But we're going to find out here that the things that we think are true may not be as true as we think they are. And again, this could have many ramifications in terms of Trump world, right? But it's also just the bigger picture at large. And Mercury is already coming off of that square with Saturn. So if you're going to say something, especially Mercury in Sagittarius, which will say something crazy off the wall and it'll be true, right? But it's like, prove your work. Like that's Mercury in Sagittarius. It's like on the surface, it'll be true. But it's like, okay, well, show us how you got there. Well, I just know that. I just know it to be true. And they may be absolutely 100% right? But that Mercury-Saturn square says, where is it? Show me. Right? We were watching Glenn Greenwald, and he had a clip of Joe Rogan interviewing Barry Weiss. And if you know who Barry Weiss is, she worked for the New York Times. And then she left the New York Times because they were censoring her story. And then she kind of jumped in with Joe Rogan world and the dark intellectual web, right? She's now since migrated back to the New York Times. But one of the things that Glenn Greenwald pointed out that Joe Rogan did is that when Barry Weiss was talking about Tulsi Gabbard as a Assad toady. Now, Joe Rogan likes Tulsi Gabbard. And he said, Assad toady, what's a toady? First of all, he questioned her about what a toady is. And she didn't even know what a fucking toady is. A toady's a sycophant, right? And then he's like, well, how do you know that she's a toady or a sycophant for Assad? And she said, well, everybody knows that. That's not how you prove your work, right? So this is really interesting. This Mercury in Sag is going to come in harder and harder with that square with Neptune. Be careful. Just, like, we know that there are things that are true, right? But if you can't prove the validity of the thing that you're saying, you're going to get hung out to dry. And that Mercury Saturn square is your friend, especially now, right? And you've got Mercury opposing Jupiter, and boy, whopper of a tail, right? But on the other hand, it's like pulling down. It's like pulling down this kind of interesting body of knowledge, which is Jupiter in Gemini retrograde, and this Mercury action is pulling it down, especially with the moon. It's like pulling down the intuitive or the emotional. And there's, it's fascinating here because we can talk about emotions with the moon in Gemini and be very kind of, dialectic about it and dissect our emotions and kind of put them under a microscope. Oh, there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And people that have moon in Gemini or moon in the third house, they are constantly talking through their emotions. That's what they do. That's how it works. If you have moon in Gemini or moon in the third house, you talk through your emotions. You may not talk to everybody, but you may have a therapist that you talk to, or you may have a couple of people that you, and some of you may talk to whomever. Sometimes talking to a total stranger can be very liberating because they don't know who you are. They're not going to judge you, right? Theoretically. So there we go, right? This is kind of where we are right now. I think we're going to have all the planets visible in the sky. Everything is in front of the sun now. right? Everything is in front of the sun. So the planets that we normally see, Venus, Mars, is Mars in front of the sun? Oh, Mars is actually behind the sun, but Venus, Mars, they're all going to be visible. Uranus will be visible with a telescope. Saturn will be visible. Jupiter is visible. So all these planets soon, right? I think it's what, the first week in December. They're all there. They're all kind of above, right? I think it has to do with maybe the retrograde with Mars and Cancer. Anyway, I'll have more on that. We'll take a look at that next week and the ramifications of that. All right. There we go. Let's get into before I do this, before I switch tracks here and start talking about Dan Bilzerian, why don't we do a little shout out to True Hemp Science, who is the sponsor of tonight's show. Let's do that. And I'll tell you what, we'll go over to the True Hemp Science webpage here. So you guys could, yes, I am over 21. Thank you for asking. So you guys can get a nice little visual here. Yep. Here we go. We get all ASMR. Do you remember back in the day when a website would load and there'd be sounds? Like that is so 1999, 2000. You into somebody's website, you hear like flute music playing or something, right? They don't do that anymore. Anyway, True Hemp Science is your one-stop shop for all things related to CBD. And you can see some of the elixirs there. And there's some there. Hey, look, we've got some testimonials, and there's a bunch of testimonials. For context, I'm a 26-year-old female who has severe Crohn's disease. My disorder has been in remission since I was 16 years old. When I first came to the store, I was worse for wear as I'd lost my insurance, was off my medicine. I was going through severe withdrawals as I no longer was on my Stellara 90 milligram shots. With the 222 milligram CBD oil and the nano CBG CBD 1600 milligrams, I genuinely feel a difference. For years, I'd lived in the bathroom or had no energy. This disease took many years from me. Yet with these two products, I actually feel like I have my life back. And I could be more grateful because of it. Within the first day, I felt a difference in current. After 4 days, I feel I can move on with my life. I thank all those in True Hemp Science for allowing me to try their products. It genuinely is life-changing. I'm happy to have my life back at all. I will continue to buy their products. It's made me both happy and healthy again. Here's another one. I have tried a lot of CBD products for managing chronic pain and anxiety. This is the first product that I will swear by. Stop by the store and talk to the super knowledgeable, passionate staff. Found them at Farmer's Market. I'm so glad I did. I was having trouble sleeping, so I purchased the gummies. Now I'm getting the best sleep ever. I'm also taking G41 and 33 daily to help me with anxiety. On top of great products, they're friendly and knowledgeable. So there you go. There's some personal testimonials about the products. And all you got to do is buy $100 or more, type in 15MINS. You'll get a goodie bag. The goodie bag will have something like this in it. A little pouch of some gummies, which you'll like. You'll get some of these droppers of the elixirs that come along with it. It is a great value. It's like an order within an order. Free delivery, $100, 50 or more. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you don't like it, send it back. Right? And you know it's also great here? You can contact us, right? Right there, contact, and you can make an appointment with Chris or one of his staff members, and they'll talk you through everything. So there you go, truehempscience.com. The sponsor of the show, besides me, robertphoenix.com, and your one-stop shop for all things CBD. All right. Thank you for letting me share that moment. Let's get into Dan Bilzerian. I think probably one of the first thing we should do is do a bit of a background on Dan Bilzerian. And Wikipedia, for all of its warts, is actually quite good at creating profiles for people. So let's get into the Wikipedia description of Dan Bilzerian. So he's Armenian, which we have already determined, just like Peter Boghossian. Is an American poker player, businessman, and social media influencer. He gained notability for his extravagant lifestyle and photo ops with scantily dressed female models. He's the eldest son of businessman Paul Alec Bilzerian and the brother of poker player and writer Adam J. Bilzerian. So his dad was a corporate takeover specialist. Interesting, huh? Daniel Brandon Bilzerian was born on December 7th, 1980 in Tampa, Florida, the son of corporate takeover specialist Paul Bilzerian and Terry Stephan. He's the brother of fellow poker player Adam Bilzerian, is half Armenian descent through his father, who was a corporate raider on Wall Street and provided his sons with trust funds. Bilzerian studied for 4 years at the University of Florida, majoring in business and criminology, but dropped out of college to pursue a professional poker career. Bilzerian played in the 2008 World Series of Poker main event, finishing in 180th place. In 2010, he was voted one of the funniest poker players on Twitter by Bluff Magazine. He's a Sag. All Sages have great senses of humor. In 2011, November 2011, Bilzerian was one of those sued by the estate of Bradley Ruderman over winnings from poker games, which were alleged to have been paid with funds from an illegal Ponzi scheme. In November 2013, Bilzerian posted an unconfirmed claim that he won $10.8 million from a single night of playing poker. In 2014, he claimed to have won $50 million throughout the year, adding that he doesn't play against professionals anymore. And the most he's ever lost in a single session is $3.6 million. Bilzerian had discussed his poker career on the aforementioned Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube. Bilzerian runs the company Ignite International Brands, which sells electronic cigarettes, CBD oils, water bottles, and vodka, among other products. Ignite is a public company headquartered in Toronto, Canada, that began trading in January 2019 under the Bills F ticker. The company reported loss over $50 million in 2019, mostly in marketing and office rental spaces. Due to his drug abuse, Bilzerian reportedly suffered 2 heart attacks before the age of 32. In 2014, Bilzerian split his time between homes in Hollywood Hills, Los Angeles, California, and Las Vegas, Nevada. He moved to Los Angeles near to Bel Air in 2018. So this is what he was famous for. Right here. This is what he was famous for. And he would often have group sex with women, right? Like a light day for him would be 2 women in one day. And he decided that he was going to get into this hedonistic lifestyle. Let's keep reading here. On August 28, 2018, Bilzerian flew to Armenia with his brother Adam and father Paul to take their oaths to obtain Armenian citizenship and joined the Armenian Armed Forces. On that same trip, he visited the Republic of Artsakh, where he visited a shooting range and fired weapons there. The government of Azerbaijan sent a note of protest to the United States over these actions due to the contested status of Artsakh and summoned U.S. Chargé d'Affaires William Gill to take an official note of protest addressed to the State Department. A court in Baku issued an arrest warrant for Bilzerian and put him on the international wanted list. 2 years later, Bilzerian and other members of the family donated $250,000 to the Armenian Fund to support Armenia and Artsakh during the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, declaring he was very disappointed that Azerbaijan decided to attack the Armenian people. In 2015, Bilzerian announced his bid to run in the 2016 United States presidential election. By December 2015, however, he began supporting Donald Trump, stating that he is raw and unfiltered, eschewing political correctness and praising his pro-gun stance. In 2024, this is where we're going to spend a large part of our time. Bilzerian condemned Israel and expressed support for Hamas amidst the Israel-Hamas war, referring to it as a resistance organization and calling its former leader, Yahya Sinwar, a hero.
Bilzerian has generated controversy for a series of statements against Jews and Judaism as early as 2010. He's gone on to record that the Jewish people perpetrated the Holodomor in Soviet Ukraine, assassinated John F. Kennedy and Muammar Gaddafi, created the transgender nonsense, and orchestrated the September 11 attacks and the Iraq War, among other assertions and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. He also said that Nazi Germany flourished when Hitler removed Jews from the banking system, and that Spain's golden age began because it expelled the Jews at the end of the Reconquista in 1492, which is when they took Spain back. The Spaniards took Spain back from the Turks, Moors, and the traders who happened to be Jewish inside of Spain, who had colluded with that group in order to take Spain over, particularly southern Spain. In a 2024 interview with Piers Morgan, which we're going to play here, and hopefully I'll play it at a speed that allows me to play it, Bilzerian claimed that Judaism promotes supremacy and rape and steals from other people as long as they're not Jewish, and that most of the problems today are caused by Jewish supremacy. And what Bilzerian is saying is that he doesn't believe any religion should be supreme. Like, there should be no chosen people, whether they're Christians or Muslims or Jews, Jewish people, people who there are Jewish people who, by the way, do not practice the Jewish faith. So these two things are can be mutually exclusive, or Sikhs, or fill in the blank. He says none of them should be chosen. Right? He invoked the term anti-Semitism as a misnomer, saying the Palestinian people are the real Semites. He also stated that all Israeli Jews are Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews and don't have actual Hebrew DNA. Bilzerian also further claimed that Jews control the media and promoted Holocaust denialism, saying, I would bet my entire net worth that it was less than $6 million. Bilzerian followed up on his claim about the Holocaust by stating that Jews have killed more Christians than 6 million, that they've basically invented genocide. So these are his statements, right? This is what he's come out and said. Now, I want to just give you some pictures of Dan Bilzerian's lifestyle. So we've got drugs, we've got women. Let's just take a look at what that looks like. So we're just going to look at, that's a slow day for Bilzerian, right? So here he is. That's his brother. You'll find pictures of him on boats with these women, right? He basically said, I am going to get seriously laid, right? So he works out, he does a lot of MMA stuff. So there he is. Now, he claims to have dropped all of this, right? He claims to have moved on from, the hedonistic lifestyle. And the reason he went down this path, which is really interesting, is because he felt really insecure when he was in high school and young, and was not somebody who was considered to be very attractive to women, right? So he kind of, did this major Sagittarian thing. He's got all this money. These women are going to be into him, right? And he's kind of chatted out. And they're all probably really fucking high on drugs. And then there's an after party. Like, this guy is like fucking living it up, right? Right there. So I'm just giving you an idea of the Bilzerian life of excess. Now, I don't know what the fuck he's doing with a mask on. That's just weird. What kind of mask is it? Oh, that's not just a mask. That's some kind of marijuana device. Some kind of marijuana device. So Dan is living that life, right? He's living that life. And what is he doing now? He has done a 180 with the Bilzerian lifestyle. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you that this is in effect a very Sagittarian thing. A very Sagittarian thing. Let's start with this guy right here. Little Richard. Born Richard Penniman, Little Richard's first big hit single was Tutti Frutti in 1955. In it and in songs that followed, his performances included influenced by gospel and the blues were wilder with a higher energy than previous rock and rolls, right? Like that's Sagittarian. It's like, okay, you guys went here, I'm going here. This couple with his flamboyant stage presence, wearing a wig and makeup, would often bring white and black audiences together in an era of segregation. Other hits followed, such as Long Tall Sally and Good Golly Miss Molly. In 1957, Little Richard left music behind, becoming a traveling evangelist. Right? He does this more than once, by the way. He returned to stage in 1962 and toured with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, supporting him. He continued to perform throughout his career. So Richard Penniman, also known as Wayne Penniman, also known as Little Richard, would go through these periods, right? And then there's a period of time where he's bisexual and gay. And then he decides that he's no longer bisexual and gay. And he gets married and he has kids. Like this is Sagittarius to a fucking T. Right? He indulges in this wild excess. And then he does this 180 more than once in his life, by the way, and becomes righteous and theoretically, turns to the Lord and moves away from this life of rock and roll and sin, right? Very Sagittarian in that regard. Okay, that's one. Let me give you another one. Sinead O'Connor. Right? She was Sinead O'Connor. We don't know how deep her use of controlled substances might have been. Although Sinead O'Connor probably was controlled. She definitely has all the earmarks of an MK Ultra gal. And there's a performance with her on English TV with Chris Christopherson, who is a renowned handler. It's like, what the fuck is Chris Christopherson doing with Sinead O'Connor on this TV show in England? Do the math on that. But what's interesting about O'Connor is how she, punk rock, shaved head, boots, right? And what does Sinead O'Connor do? What does she do? Yeah, I think you know what she does. If not, I'll show you. Right here. Sinead O'Connor was ordained as a priest in the Latin Tridentine Church in 1999. O'Connor was ordained in a hotel suite in Lourdes, France, by Bishop Michael Cox. She took the name Mother Bernadette Marie and was the first woman to be ordained as a priest in the Latin Church. There you go, Latin Tridentine Church. So Sinead O'Connor plays this role, right? Whoops, we gotta go back here. There she is. Whoops, that's our next one. She plays this role. She goes from being like this rock and roller, right? Doc Martin, shaved head. She becomes a priest. Okay, you see where we're going here? Like, this is part of the evolutionary path of Sagittarius, to go from sin to righteousness. Right. All right. Here's another one. Right here. This one is famous. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Commoner made good. He was appointed as Archbishop by King Henry II. They argued over church privileges, and Becket was killed by 4 knights who took the king at his words. Who will rid me of this troublesome priest? Okay, now if you look at Thomas Becket, you'll see the same pattern here, because he was a bit of a lad with Henry II. Right? He was somebody who was he was not always a quote unquote man of the cloth. Right? Let me see if I can find this here. So if you watch the movie with Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton plays Becket, and they have kind of this life, right? Where they're here. I'll show you. Let's go here. Becket was born 1119 or 1120, according to tradition, at Cheapside, London, on 21 December, the last day of the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle. He was the son of Gilbert and Matilda Becket. Gilbert's father was from Tyrville in the lordship of Brionne in Normandy, and was either a small landowner or a petty knight. Matilda was also of Norman descent. Her family may have originated near Caen. Gilbert was perhaps related to Theobald of Bec, whose family was also from Tyrville. Gilbert began his life as a merchant, perhaps in textiles, but by the 1120s, he was living in London. He was a property owner, living on the rental income from his properties. He also served as the sheriff of the city at some point. Becket's parents were buried in Old St. Paul's Cathedral. One of Becket's father's wealthy friends, Richard de la Agile, pardon my butchering, often invited Thomas to his estates in Sussex, where Becket encountered hunting and hawking. According to Grimm, Becket learned much from Richard, who was later a signatory of the constitutions of Clarendon against him. At the age of 10, Becket was sent as a student to the Merton Priory, southwest in the city of the city in Surrey. Blah 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 blah. Sometime after Becket began his schooling, Gilbert Becket suffered financial reverses. The younger Becket was forced to earn a living as a clerk. Gilbert first secured a place for his son in the business of a relative, Osbert Houtendier. Later, Becket acquired a position in the household of Theobald of Bec, by then Archbishop of Canterbury. So he has this period, right, of time where he is a bit of a lad. As Chancellor, Becket enforced the king's traditional sources of revenue that were exacted from all landowners. So check that out, right? Theobald entrusted him with several important missions to Rome, and also sent him to Bologna and Auxerre to study canon law, very Sagittarian. In 1154, Theobald named Becket Archdeacon of Canterbury and other ecclesiastical offices, including a number of beneficiaries, prebends at Lincoln Cathedral and St. Paul's Cathedral, in the office of Provost of Beverley. His efficiency in those posts led Theobald to recommend him to King Henry II for the vacant post of Lord Chancellor, to which Becket was appointed in 1155. So he becomes Lord Chancellor. So he and Henry are buds, right? As Chancellor, Becket enforced the king's traditional sources of revenue that were exacted from all landowners, including churches and bishoprics. King Henry sent his son Henry to live in Becket's household, it being custom then for noble children to be fostered out to other noble houses. So he is not like a man of the cloth at this point, right? And eventually, Henry will turn on Becket, right? And he winds up killing Becket. And it's because of this Constitutions of Clarendon. So Becket was ordained a priest on the 2nd of June, Gemini, opposite sign, at Canterbury, and on June 3rd, 1162, was consecrated as Archbishop by Henry of Blois, the Bishop of Winchester, and the other suffragan bishops of Canterbury. A rift grew between Henry and Becket as the new Archbishop resigned his chancellorship. So he's going from being a chancellor and being secular. And again, I know it's a movie, but if you watch the movie Becket with Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton, these guys, were living that life. They would hunt, they would drink, they would bed women, and eventually Becket moves away from this, right? This led to a series of conflicts with the king, including one over the jurisdiction of secular courts over English clergymen, which accelerated antipathy between Becket and the king. Attempts by Henry to influence other bishops against Becket began in Westminster in October 1163, where the king sought approval of the traditional rights of royal government in regard to the church. So what Henry is trying to do is establish authority over the church. This led to the Constitutions of Clarendon, where Becket was officially asked to agree with the king's rights or face political repercussions. So now Becket has to say, okay, well, the king and his court and his rights preside over the church and over, God's rights, and he won't do it. He won't do it. And basically, he kills him. Convicted on the charges, Becket stormed out of the trial and fled to the continent. Henry pursued the fugitive archbishop with a series of edicts, targeting Becket and all Becket's friends and supporters. But King Louis VII of France offered Becket protection. He spent nearly 2 years in the Cistercian Abbey of Pontigny until Henry's threats against the order obliged him to return to Sens. Becket fought back by threatening excommunication and an interdict against the king and bishops in the kingdom. But Pope Alexander III, though sympathizing with him in theory, favored a more diplomatic approach. Papal legates were sent in 1167 with an act to act as arbitrators. So eventually, he's killed. He's killed. Henry winds up sentencing, right, and killing him. So the reason this is, important is because Becket is a Sagittarius, and he goes from being secular and collecting, whatever is Caesar's due, which is for Henry II, and their buddies, and they like to kind of live it up. And he does this 180. He does this moral 180. And I'm telling you, this is a big part of the path of Sagittarius. There's another Sagittarius, which is really, really interesting, or who's interesting. And he sort of starts at the beginning and does the 180 in reverse. And it's Sam Kinison, right? So Sam Kinison is a Sagittarius. He's brought up in a Pentecostal household. And so Sam Kinison, Sagittarius, was this young preacher. And he was really into being this young preacher. He has an accident. Something happens to his head. And it's like he's a different person. And he does the 180 in the other direction. And Sam Kinison becomes this crazy, absolutely crazy, wild manifestation of just pure Sagittarian id, right? Like that's, and then he does the 180 again, and he quits the drugs, and he's still doing comedy, and he's got his girlfriend, and he has an accident on the highway on his way to another gig. He went through it again. He did the Sagittarian 180 again, starting off as this, very talented fire and brimstone Pentecostal 12-year-old, 13-year-old preaching kid, and gets bonked on the head. And next thing you know, he's, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, that's Sam Kinison. Another really interesting person in this regard, the Sagittarian regard, is Reggie White, who is a Sagittarian, right? And he starts off as a Christian, and eventually he winds up like going to Israel and goes even further into like this weird conversion process where he's, learning how to speak Hebrew, right? And basically on his way to becoming, for lack of a better term, like Jewish, right? Because Reggie wanted to read, he said, I decided I needed to read God's word in its original form and draw my own conclusions, not ones that have been passed on to me. So he's trying to understand Hebrew to get him closer to God. And so as a result of this, he starts going into the Old Testament, right? And very interesting. Again, it's not a 180, but in some ways, like it kind of is a 180, right? Like theoretically, who killed Jesus? Right? He's learning again. This is, you go into the Bible, right? You go into the Bible, and technically we're talking about not just Pilate, Romans, right? But if you really dig in, who winds up killing Jesus? It's the Sanhedrin. Pilate will have nothing to do with it. He has nothing to do with it. Pilate will not, he will not do the dirty work, right? So the Sanhedrin convict him, and the Sanhedrin are the ones that, theoretically put him on the cross, right? So Reggie White, who is a Christian, winds up going down the path, again, theoretically, of the people who wind up killing his Lord and Savior. Very weird, right? But it feels very Sagittarian also. All right, let's take a look at Bilzerian's chart. I've kind of set this up for you. I've kind of set it up for you that this is, in a lot of ways, this is the Sagittarian path. So let me get into Bilzerian's chart. But maybe I should play, I don't know, man. If I play, why don't you just look it up? Because if I play the Piers Morgan interview, they're probably going to take this show down. So I urge you to look up the Piers Morgan interview and hear what Bilzerian has to say. And I urge you to look up the Patrick Bet-David interview. So what I've been trying to do is like set the stage astrologically to show you like this is the evolution of a Sagittarian person. This is what they do. So I'm going to put his chart up here. Why don't I throw some transits in? Here we go. So this is Bilzerian's chart. By the way, Sagittarius also rules gambling. Fifth house. The fifth house is sport and pastimes, but Sagittarius rules gambling, taking big risks, big money, right? Everything's bigger with Sagittarius. All right, so let me go in here and I'll throw his chart up here so we can take a look at it together. So this is Dan Bilzerian's chart. It's a very interesting chart. First of all, we're going to go with Libra rising. And Libra rising people, whether it's men or women, they're attractive, right? They generally are attractive. And some will think, well, Dan Bilzerian, handsome guy, right? And he's got that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction right on his ascendant. right? Jupiter Saturn conjunction. Interesting conjunction. And so here, this is all about being expansive and, Jupiter rules Sag, right? And then there's the come to Jesus with Saturn. Jupiter just sitting on the other side of the ascendant, Saturn on the other side. So they're straddling the ascendant. 6, 7, 8. The ascendant is the midpoint between Jupiter and Saturn. So that's pretty powerful. And Libra wants to balance things out and equalize. So of all the signs that are connected to social justice, to me, Libra is the one that is probably the most obvious in a lot of ways, even more so than Aquarius. Like Aquarius can be very extreme in its like application of social justice, but Libra wants to balance things out. So this is what Bilzerian is theoretically doing, right? Jupiter, live large. You can all see that his father right there on the ascendant plays a huge role, leaves him a trust fund, probably shows him how to, run a business, right? He has Pluto also in Libra in the first house, 23 degrees, conjunct Juno, right? Like it's potent. It's potent. And Juno's always looking for the new thing. And he's got Pluto conjunct Spica in his chart. And you just see like all the images of women and beauty, right? All that feminine kind of excess in a lot of ways. So he's really wired, right? He's, and the thing with Pluto, I was going to mention this about Bilzerian. So there was a time in my life when I had Pluto transiting my ascendant, right? It was transiting my ascendant in Scorpio. And I was kind of like a typical male during that period. And I made this decision that I wanted to get laid a lot, right? And I'd always been involved in relationships, usually like serial monogamy. And when Pluto was on my ascendant in Scorpio, I said, fuck it. I just want to get laid a lot. And Pluto in Scorpio was a very dark influencer in my life, and it made a lot of those things happen. And when Bilzerian talks about when he was young and he felt insecure, like, with like girls and shit in high school, right? I was kind of that way. And it was maybe proving to myself that I could do these things. It wasn't that hard. And like I said, Pluto was more than able to make a lot of these things happen in my life. But like Bilzerian, I found out at a certain point that it was like really hollow. Like these things were becoming less interesting to me, just far less interesting. And it was like, okay, well, and not only just hollow, but I was kind of like living with this kind of growing darkness in some ways. And so eventually I ended that phase of my life. But for about 2.5 years, I wasn't living quite like Dan Bilzerian, but I kind of had my own version of that. And so I understand at a certain point where it was just, for him, it became very superficial. And I would agree with that. Like it wasn't, after you figure out how to do these things, it's not rocket science, especially with Pluto there. And it just became really boring. And it was on me. And I was just kind of, manipulating the environment around me to have these experiences. But even that became boring. Right. So Bilzerian has it all lined up here in the first house. Pluto, Juno, and eventually runs into Black Moon Lilith, which is the shadow, right? He's going to run into the shadow of whatever kind of, intimacy or relationship needs that aren't being met, right? So that's just his ascendant alone. And he's able to, I think, make a lot of things happen with Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto. Like that's a really heavy duty first house. But in Libra, it's not heavy-handed, right? It's not like Aries, or it's not like Leo, which would be larger than life. Although he does have kind of larger than life like aspects, but with Libra, it's going to be much more kind of like here, I'm going to show you my lifestyle, right? Isn't this cool? Isn't this beautiful? This is an extension of who I am. And it's like completely surrounded with women. Jupiter and Libra, right? So let's drop down here. He's got Venus and Scorpio, which is going to power a lot of his desire, right? And that he's got that sextile with Mars in Capricorn. So Mars in Capricorn, whatever he wants, he'll go after it. And if it wouldn't necessarily be relationship. Aries on the 7th house cusp is like, immediacy in relationship. Like, I want it now. I want it now. I want it now. Right. So like, that's where his relationship needs get met. But what I'm really interested in his chart is what's going on here. Uranus, Scorpio, right? And that's exalted. Now we get into Sagittarian territory. Mercury, Moon, balsamic, Sun, Neptune, all in Sag. And then here we go. The third house being ruled by Gemini, which is up here in the 9th, and the pivot, right? Once Jupiter started to move into Dan Bilzerian's 9th house, he started to talk about this stuff, right? And who did he really launch it with? Patrick Bet-David, who is a Libra. So Bet-David's sun is somewhere in here, right around here. And that's where all of a sudden Dan Bilzerian shocks the fuck out of people. Like, this guy is the most blunt person that's ever come forward and has not minced words about what he feels about Israel and the Jewish, both religious and power elite. Like, he hasn't minced words at all. And he got on Piers Morgan and he thought it wasn't one of my best interviews. And you know what? I would tend to agree a little bit. One of the things that Bilzerian talks about is this incident that took place in Israel, where they had captured some people from Gaza, maybe they're Hamas people, and they were in a prison in Israel. And this is a true story. I'm not bending the truth. You can look it up. And there were members of the Israeli guard who were fighting to get into the jail cells of these Palestinians and rape them. This is a true story. It came up in the Knesset, right? There were groups of people inside of the Knesset who thought it was horrible. And there were other people inside the Knesset who was like, shut the fuck up. This is a bad look for us. Just let it go. Don't make a big deal out of it. Right. So Bilzerian brings this up with Piers Morgan, and he doesn't ask Morgan if he had heard about this case, which is true. You can look it up. I'm not fabricating the truth. And Morgan would have had to have done one of two things. If he had said, yes, I'm aware of it, which he probably is, because he hangs out with Candace Owens, Bilzerian could have said, well, then how do you feel about that? Does that bother you? Does that bother you that these, and then Piers Morgan said, well, we can't just judge an entire group of people by some individuals. That's if he said he knew about it. If he said, well, I'm not aware of that, then Bilzerian could have gone in and said, hey, look, that's your job as a journalist. That's lazy. It's either lazy or you're turning a blind eye, which is it, Piers? So Bilzerian is new at this whole thing. And I don't think he's going to do a pivot, by the way. I don't think he's not on that path. And what I'm interested in is, like, when did all of this really start to click for him? right? Like, when did he start to go through this awakening? And I would say that if you wanted to really wind the clock back, although probably at that time he was living the life, the Saturn transits through Sagittarius, which ended right around 2009, 2009. I'm sorry, 2019. 2019, is that right? When Saturn goes into Capricorn, pretty sure about that. He would have had all that Saturn come in here and just absolutely crush his Sagittarian planets. But I'll wind the clock back to March 8th of 2023, when Saturn went into Pisces. And that's when it started to square his Mercury, his moon, his sun, and again, Mercury, moon, sun. Right now, it's back again, squaring his moon and the sun, and it will square his Saturn. That's coming, and I think that Saturn Neptune square is going to be pretty heavy for him. And he's going to have to figure out where he is in this mix, right? Like that's a heavy, heavy, heavy square, especially when he's taken on Israel and, quote unquote, Jewish power inside the media, inside the banking world. You name it. Like, there's been no stone unturned by Dan Bilzerian. So the Saturn Sun square is a major test, and he's in it now, right? And I think this interview with Piers Morgan, like Piers, even though I think Patrick Bet-David probably gets more views than Piers Morgan on TV, Piers Morgan on TV and YouTube probably gets more views than Bet-David. So people are probably hearing about Dan Bilzerian for the first time at another level through Piers Morgan World, right? And this is that Saturn Sun square. And he comes in and he does this interview. It just happened like last week. And it's a challenge for him, right? It's a total challenge. And those challenges are not over. Like, they're not over. Also, Saturn, again, if you back it up a little bit, when, earlier, before it went retrograde, it was sextiling his natal Mars, right? And it's kind of backed up and went to 15 and kind of back in the sextile with his natal Mars, which I think probably gave him not permission, but a sense of like authority when it came to doing something and talking about something that would absolutely ruin most people. Now, I think Bilzerian has probably put his assets in places that are going to be hard to get to, because, like, this is what happens when you speak out against an extremely powerful group, particularly this group. They'll come after you, and they will do everything in their power to absolutely ruin you, whatever it is, right? Whether it's professionally, he doesn't have to worry about his profession. He's Dan Bilzerian. Financially, well, he's probably smart enough to know where to stack his chips, right? So we have professionally, we have economically, then there's personal. So where is he on the personal attack front? This is a guy that's lived his life on fucking line, right? He's shown us what he's done. He's shown us what he's been up to, right? All the drugs, all the women. Like, there's not a lot that Dan Bilzerian hasn't left out there for people to see. And a lot of people said that he was just like the ultimate, Chad, he's a cur, right? There's a name for him that comes out of this sort of, pre-Victorian world as a cur. He's a libertine cur. And it's all out there. Now all of a sudden people are like, whoa, what the fuck has happened to this guy? Right? He was like one of the most unlikable people in the world based on flaunting his lifestyle and, probably fucking people over along the way. but you can't get away with it for too long, especially if you're a Sagittarius, because he has to live by a coda of truth. If you don't live by a coda of truth through Sagittarius, there's an astrological price to pay. And I'll give you an example of somebody who didn't do that. It's Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor, Sagittarius. Richard Pryor knew what the truth was, right? But where Richard Pryor went wrong is that Richard Pryor decided to prioritize the truth along racial lines. And I'm not talking about him speaking out against making fun of whites or whatever. Richard Pryor had a business manager that he hired out of Atlanta. His name escapes me, who happened to be black. And Richard Pryor was like, I'm going to hire somebody who's black because they're not going to fuck me over. Well, guess what happened? His manager fucked him over. So Richard Pryor was aligning himself with a limited truth or a racial truth. It wasn't truth with a capital T. And so this guy completely fucked him over. Richard Pryor lost a shit ton of money. So Richard Pryor had a tremendous capacity to be a truth teller, but Richard Pryor ultimately winds up sort of aligning himself with lesser truths, right? And he puts himself in a very compromised position and winds up having to do, goofy movie roles like The Toy with Jackie Gleason. And some people like Brewster's Millions. To me, Pryor starts doing all these movie roles that have no bite. He becomes the person that ultimately he rails against. He sells out. Richard Pryor sells out. And he sells out because he made wrong choices. And those wrong choices mostly had to do with the fact that he chose somebody to do his accounting and invest and be his business manager based on color, and he fucks him over. Right? Instead of finding somebody who he can absolutely trust, it doesn't matter what color he is, right? Like, I trust this guy. Like, he makes the wrong choice. Like, it's a lower version of truth. And then he has to make a bunch of bad movies in order to bail himself out. And he does really well, and he leaves money on to his family. But that's besides the point. Like Richie Pryor kinds of, but he's one of these guys, he can't stop, right? He's over the top with crack and cocaine. And when he talks about there was this period of time when he was living in Berkeley for a whole year, just snorting coke and listening to jazz. This is before he becomes big in Hollywood. That's all he did for a year, right? And he had a very, very dark and troubled past, which is why he did these things. But he doesn't go all the way, right? Richie Pryor could go all the way. I'll tell you another guy, another Sagittarian who does this. It's Bill Hicks. Bill Hicks is a Sagittarian. And what does he do? He starts off and does this comedic life, and he's great at it, right? He's fantastic. Bill Hicks is one of my favorite comedians. And then what happens? He does a bunch of blow, he does a bunch of booze, right? And Bill Hicks fucking burns out. And then what does he do? He does like this 180, and he doesn't drink and he doesn't do booze. He smokes up a chimney, and Bill Hicks becomes kind of this moralist, right? He always had it at his core, but Sagittarians can be very sardonic. And that's what I would say about Bill Hicks. He's very sardonic. And by the end of his life, he's going down to Waco, and he's having this weird intersection with Alex Jones, also at Waco. But Bill Hicks does this 180, and he goes from being a heavy duty drug and alcohol user to not doing anything at all except for smoking cigarettes, right? So this is the Sagittarian flip, right? And Bilzerian's in it now. What I find really interesting about Bilzerian's chart is the true node in Leo. Like, I find that really, really fascinating, because that's where he's supposed to go, right? He's supposed to get into his heart and be courageous. And he's doing it through the 11th house, which happens to be what? Social media. And that south node is in Aquarius, which is kind of like if the true node is in Aquarius, let's flip him. The true node is Aquarius. He has to kind of he has to ascribe to some level of group participation. Like Aquarius is really weird because it wants to be an individual, but it also wants to find its niche inside the group. Right? It wants to be the hub, but it also needs to be a spoke. That's not the case with Leo. Leo is the hub, right? Leo is the sun. Leo is this sense that the individual and not the group is going to stand out. Now he has this true note in the 11th house. And I think we're seeing like this thing with Dan Bilzerian. We saw it before with this other version, like, look at me, I'm the Giga Chad, right? But this is a different version of it. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens when Mars goes direct again and goes back into his 11th. It's not there yet, but it does go into his 11th house. And he's got the Uranus opposition, right? So he's going through this midlife crisis as well, which is what the Uranus opposition, puts into play. So you're seeing this reversal. We've been seeing this reversal with Bilzerian and Uranus going through his 8th house. And what's also interesting is that Israel's rising sign is Libra, right? It's not the same degree as Libra, but it's the same rising sign as Bilzerian, right? And Uranus has gone into Israel's 8th house. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's conjunct their sun, right? Like Israel's sun. So if I were Dan Bilzerian, like, he's not going to play it safe. This is a guy who gambles for a living and has gambled for a living. This is a guy with a Mars, Jupiter square tempts the fates, right? So I don't think this guy's going to back down. But I don't know. What do you tell him? Like, no, he's not going to be careful. It's going to be very interesting to see how, like, he develops along these lines. And Pluto is going to be moving back into Aquarius, right? So what's he going to be doing? Sextiling his Mercury. And I think a lot of this began for him more than likely with this Pluto sextile to Mercury in his chart. I don't know the exact turning point for Bilzerian. I'd actually like to interview the guy. He'd be a fascinating to interview. But with Pluto sextiling his Mercury, I don't think he's done. Like, this guy's just getting started. But he's dangerous. Like, he's more of a threat now than he was when he was running around being the Giga Chad. And it'll be interesting to see how they wind up trying to silence him, right? Because again, that Saturn is squaring his sun right now. This is a test. This is a big test. And it'll be interesting to watch what happens. Doesn't have a lot of Earth in his chart. It's like you could make a case in a lot of ways that Mars in his chart in Capricorn, in a lot of ways, grounded him. So, like, this whole sex thing kind of grounded him in some ways, right? Like, it trines Chiron. Not a lot of Earth. Like, what's going to ground him? It's going to be that Mars. So Bilzerian's an interesting character. As far as his chart goes, he's got a bundle chart. So what is he learning about? He's learning about himself, right? He's learning about his values, his monetary values, material values, ultimately with Uranus, like freedom, being a rebel, making his own money, like determining his own path, right? Like, this is not a guy who worked for anybody, but he's learning about all of that, right? Second house, he's learning about ideas and communication through the third house, and then ultimately home and family. That's it, man. This is what this guy is here to learn. But with the outer planets or the outer signs, it's going to have a bit of a different expression. So, yeah. And then Pallas is right down there conjuncting his Neptune. He's a man on a mission. Very interesting character. Very, very interesting character. How's the mission going to end? That's the question. All right. That'll just about do it here for us tonight. For myself and Peachy here in the hill country of Texas, we wish you all a peaceful end to your Sunday evening. Although I think I stirred things up a little bit. And with Jupiter and the moon conjunct in Gemini, probably a lot of chatting going on, not just in chat, but maybe in your brain, maybe in your own home. And we'll be back here on Tuesday with the Astro Weather. And we're in interesting times. Very, very interesting times where we're watching a Giga Chat like Dan Bilzerian do a complete 180 and take on not just any institution, but hey, some might say one of the most powerful institutions in the world. We're living in that time right now. And we have this mass media, beyond mass media, to be able to track and chart and talk about this thing that this guy is doing, not only from a personal perspective, but from an astrological perspective as well. And I hope you learned a little bit about Sagittarius tonight and the really fascinating path that Sagittarian people are on, and living through excess, but then going to perhaps another degree of excess, right? In their own way. All right. Don't forget, hit that like. Please hit the like. And I encourage you to subscribe, because through subscribing to the channel, we get a bit of a higher profile just for now until we move over to Rumble. So I'd like to top out at 16K before we shuffle out of here and move over to the Rumble side. So if we could get there, that would be awesome. In the meantime, if you're interested in having a session with me, you can go to my website, which is linked there. If you'd like to do a star of the day, go ahead, grab that, line it up, and I need some lead time if I'm going to do some of these for people. All right, that's it. Treat each other well. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to stay open what's possible. Chataria, thank you so much. Mods, thank you so much. Anybody that's bought me a cup of coffee, thank you for that as well. God bless. We'll see you back here on Tuesday. Bye for now.